the course of the month, we've had an audio recording playing of our third artist in the exhibition, Blake Kimzey. And he's also going to read an excerpt from that piece tonight. I'm not normally one given to preparing statements, but Blake, in preparation for this, sent me something. It was so good, I'm just going to go read it straight from the So most of you know Blake Kimzey from his attempts to perfect accents from all corners of the United Kingdom. He is also a fiction writer. Blake's fiction is nominated for a 2012 Pushcart Prize, and his work has been published in Australia, England, and North America. Tonight he is reading from Donald Mason's City Inspection and the Stakeout Standoff, which is featured as a sound piece in this month's exhibition, which is called Underneath the Bunker. And it's alongside the work, as I mentioned, of Deb Socolow and Travis Head. It's also in the latest issue of a journal called Monkey Bicycle, which we should have in the store here sometime soon. But at any rate, I'd like to thank you all for coming again, and welcome Blake Kimzey.
Thank you for that nice introduction that I typed an email to. It was very nice to print that off. Well, all right, this is from the story Donald Mason City Inspection and the Stakeout Standoff. And I'm really happy to be included in this. Some of the narrative work had some elements of paranoia. And the title character of this story, Donald Mason, definitely is a paranoid individual. So I'm going to read 4 small sections from the story. It's a longer story, just to give you kind of a taste for what the story is like. And for all the people here who I work with, thank you so much for coming. Everyone else, thank you for coming. But I'd like to dedicate the Geno's restaurant that appears in here to everyone who came here from. Or who Yes. Okay, so here we go. Like, this is what I need after a long day at Geno's, where I serve obese Americans salt, sugar, fat, which is what cavemen would have wanted if they knew how to process and batch large quantities of pseudo-Italian ingredients purchased at discount thanks to economies of scale. All I want to do is soak my feet in Epsom salt, finish Salem's Lot, and maybe blog about the state demise of our country. But there is an orange notice of violation taped to my front door, which is sure to put me into a mood, as in, fuck, now this, what next? I read the rectangular notice by the porch light, freezing my balls off because it is 9 degrees outside and the moon and its halo feel like a solitary spotlight trained on me, as if I'm the star of a stage show with low production quality and even worse acting. I turn the notice over in my hand and realize a glorified meter maid, probably that twat Dan Lowry, who I graduated technical college with 2 years ago, or one of his clones, had the nuts to ding me with a violation. The city has a battalion of these dickweed Dan Lowrys driving around in beat-up gray Ford Rangers, writing tickets for everything and dinging people like the one I got. Something about section 17-2B-9 of the Fairview City Code, which basically reads, "What the F are you thinking, Donald Mason? Clear your sidewalk of snow and ice or be fined. We're coming back to check. You have 24 hours. So then we fast forward in the story. Next morning, I call in and tell Gino I got food poisoning at the Chinese place on Main. I've used the excuse a few times before, but everyone at Gino's and most people in town have actually gotten food poisoning from the Chinese place on Main, so it isn't too much of a stretch. Plus, I can't tell Gino I can't make it in for a lunch shift because I've got a goddamn war going on with Dan Lowry and the city over code. My dad used to ignore traffic tickets, municipal notices, fines, and jury notices, and would tell me and my brother that Paul Revere didn't ride his ass off on his trusty horse so that one day we could get dinged by a municipal lower court for some made-up city code buried in the stacks at City Hall. Dad kept an SKS assault rifle in the basement and had snow shovels positioned behind every door in the house in case the government or a robber came to steal or take what wasn't theirs. When Dad died a few years ago, one of the last things he said to me and my brother was, "Stay off the grid, boys. It's a goddamn abortion." I still feel guilty having mail delivered to my residence instead of a P.O. box, and the satellite dish perched on the roof is a particular point of shame. If Dad saw the dish, he'd ask how I liked hosting Big Brother for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And I would have to lie and tell him that it is a prop, so the powers that be think I'm towing the line, that I'm just Joe Citizen towing the goddamn line. He would never understand how easy it is to fall asleep to You've Got Mail on TNT, or how great it is to catch Roadhouse on TBS when hockey is the only sport on TV. Fast forward. I remember how lazy Dan Lowry was at technical college. He had soft features on his face and wore his hair in a kind of feathered mop top, like he was a male member of Charlie's Angels. He wore new coveralls like he was some kind of old vocational pro, as if the rest of us had just fallen off the vocational turnip truck. We were partners in weldering and soldering class, and I had been using a torch for years out on my uncle's farm. And there I was, not wearing coveralls and feeling like the newbie, as if I'd gotten caught with my pants down or my dick caught in my zipper. It gets worse. Dan would complain about going blind because he was born with some sort of retina deficiency, and the blowtorch was so bright. He'd complain about getting metal poisoning from the soldering iron, contaminants leaching into his skin, which isn't really even a possibility. Case in point, name me a person you know who has gotten metal poisoning, and the answer is probably 0, I bet. I wanted to strip Dan of his rights to wear coveralls and give him a pair of jean shorts and some lime green zinc and tell him to go to Florida and be a lifeguard or something. Even if you exclude the belly aching, he couldn't solder with any level of skill. You could have taught an infant with one thumb in its mouth how to solder in half the time it took Dan to learn. He was always scared he was going to burn himself on the soldering iron or the blowtorch, or that hot metal would drip on his clothes or scald his skin. He had no confidence. There were no calluses on his hands, and one day I saw that he had 4 credit cards in his wallet, as if cheap credit instead of a workaday attitude was the answer to all of his problems. When I saw a punch card to a fancy espresso joint in his shirt pocket, I wondered how he even knew about coveralls. And if this guy was wearing them, then maybe JCPenney was selling them in its men's department, which would seem to herald the end of the world as far as I'm concerned, because you only get coveralls at a place that sells livestock feed and electrical tape. One day I went to talk to the instructor before class, an old man named Guy, who had lamb chop sideburns and looked like an Irish newsie, a man I totally respected because he had worked on the railroads and farms and even on a few skyscrapers in Omaha. I complained that I couldn't be partnered with Dan any longer because he was a tenderfoot. Guy just stared at me blankly, holding his Mount Rushmore coffee cup, and I didn't know what else to say, so I said to Guy, exasperated and gesturing with my hands, "Dan is a pussy, Guy." When I turned around, Dan was standing behind me, and apparently had been for some time. Dan said, "That's funny, because I think you're the pussy." I let the words, "You're the pussy," sink in for just a millisecond, and when the full weight of those words hit, I went off and cold-cocked Dan right across the nose. Dad said, "If you're going to get into a fight, might as well throw the first punch, because that will be the only sure humdinger in the whole fracas. You shit or you get off the pot." And that day, I took a shit with my fist. After he got back on his feet, standing there in his unscuffed boots up to a high gloss, Dan raised his fist and just held it cocked there in the air and never swung at me. He just stood there, looking like a guy who needs to shit, but gets off the pot, so he shits his pants instead. Fast forward. And this is the last section I'm going to read in the story. When I step outside, little flurries fall and the wind picks up, and I notice that the tracks across my yard where the mailman walked yesterday are starting to fade under this new dusting of snow. It is overcast, and even if the sun were out, it is so cold that it wouldn't matter. Having gotten up so fast from my perch at the window, the warmth from the whiskey now spreads through my entire body, and I am lightheaded and my thoughts are racing, and these on-the-fly decisions make my heart beat against my chest like someone is banging on a timpani. My face is flush red, and I can feel my whiskers standing at attention in the cold. I feel like $1,000,000. A little faint of breath, but $1,000,000 nonetheless. Standing on my half of the front yard, I feel like someone must have felt during the Oklahoma land rush. Someone who had staked his claim and was willing to defend it from all the Indians and Dan Lowrys out there. I walk to where the sidewalk crosses the driveway and wait there for Dan to look up and see me. I rub my hands together and think this must be the most beautiful day we've had all winter. This is the way I envisioned it last night when I yanked the orange notice of violation from my door and later crumpled it up and tossed it in the trash. Section 17-2B-9 of the Fairview City Code can suck it. "Hey," I yell. "Hey, Lowry." The person looks up and I squint and see that he is not holding a handheld PDA. He must be hiding it in his back pocket so he can spring it on me at the last second and link up with the satellite and ding me instantaneously. I'm not sure that it is even Dan walking toward me, but it must be, it has to be. The guy must have been waiting for this moment for the last 2 years, ever since I gave him a knuckle sandwich and watched him summarily shit his pants as Guy looked on. "Lowry," I yelled again, a bit uncertainly. "You coming to ding this guy?" "What?" the person asks. He has his head cocked toward me in an effort to hear me better. We are both wearing toboggans, and it is really hard to hear anything but your own breathing and the wind rustling the bare tree limbs overhead. I do notice my breathing. I'm breathing pretty quickly, but I'm just excited. If the world started to spin and everything receded from view, we would just be two cavemen with clubs waiting to square off. Each of us wearing a saber-toothed skin with long, ratty hair, and each of us hosting a few blood-sucking prehistoric ticks in the dark, moist parts of our bodies. Are you or are you not Dan Lowry? I ask. I feel totally primal, and I enunciate like I'm talking to someone who doesn't speak English as a first language. At this point, the person is just one lawn over, crossing a driveway that has been salted recently. When I turn around and survey the patch of sidewalk in front of my duplex, it looks like someone has taken a water hose to it and let it freeze overnight. The thought never crossed my mind to salt the sidewalk or comply with city code. You can't even call this civil disobedience because this is my sidewalk, my piece of the American dream. I'm breathing heavier and I see Dan, or whoever the person is, fidgeting with a set of earbuds that are tethered to an iPod clipped to his waistband. Probably listening to some liberal podcast on NPR while he walks around and dings people and collects his pound of flesh and lets you know that he accepts Visa and MasterCard to pay fines, which is so symbolic of the state demise of our country that I want to puke. Just put it on credit. What were you saying? Dan asks. Once the earbuds are out and the toboggan has been cinched up on his forehead, I can totally tell that it is Dan Lowry. The nerve of this guy. I walk over and stand in the middle of my frozen patch of sidewalk because I figure this is the position of greatest defiance. It is slippery, and I feel at once that I need a pair of ice skates. And I wonder if Dan can see the uncertainty in my face as I try to regain my balance. I breathe harder than ever, and I start to circle my arms backward to catch my balance, and after a feverish moment of instability, the soles of my caterpillar boots hold firmly to the ice. And that's the end.
So we have